She was sitting in a park, reading a book. Minutes later, she was in handcuffs, for no reason. But when the officers dragged her away, they had no idea who she was, and that one day she'd be the one deciding their fate. When 2 officers arrested her, they never imagined they would face her again, this time in a courtroom where she held the power to decide their fate. It was a warm afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado. The park buzzed with life. Children laughed as they chased each other across the grass. Joggers moved steadily along the winding trails, and families lounged beneath the sprawling shade of oak trees. Among the scattered park-goers, a black woman sat alone on a bench near the pond, the sun casting a soft glow on her face. A thick hardcover book rested on her lap, her fingers gently turning the pages. Her name was Camille Johnson, a sharp, respected attorney known for her poise and intellect. This rare break in her busy schedule was a chance to unwind and escape the pressures of the courtroom. But her quiet afternoon shattered in an instant. The screech of tires sliced through the air, drawing curious glances from nearby families. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb. 2 officers emerged, their eyes scanning the area until they locked onto Camille. She was the only person sitting alone, and their focus was immediate and unyielding. "Ma'am, can we speak with you for a moment?" one officer called out, his voice tight and edged with authority. Camille glanced up calmly, masking her confusion. "Of course," she replied, closing her book with deliberate care. Years in the legal system had taught her the importance of composure. The second officer stepped closer, his tone clipped. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Her brows knitted together. "Suspicious activity?" she repeated, lifting the book. "I'm sitting here reading. Is that a crime now?" The officer's expressions remained hard. "Can we see some ID?" the first officer demanded. A tense quiet settled over the park. A few onlookers paused their conversations, their faces tight with unease. Camille's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "I don't understand. What am I being accused of?" "It's routine," the second officer said, though his tone suggested anything but routine. The knot in Camille's stomach tightened. She knew her rights, and she knew this wasn't a simple inquiry. With a controlled breath, she reached into her bag and retrieved her wallet, handing over her license. The first officer scanned her ID with an exaggerated slowness. "Camille Johnson," he read aloud, his voice laced with something just shy of mockery. "What's your business here, Miss Johnson?" "I live here," Camille said, her patience thinning. "I'm enjoying the park. Is there a problem with that?" The officer returned her ID, but the questions continued. "Do you always carry a book like that?" the second officer asked, as if reading in public was inherently suspicious. "Are you waiting for someone?" his partner added, his hand drifting toward his belt. Camille's jaw tightened. She had faced countless aggressive attorneys in the courtroom, but this was different. This was personal. "I'm not answering any more questions unless you tell me why you're detaining me," she said firmly. Her refusal seemed to tip the balance. The first officer stepped closer. "Don't get smart," he snapped. "We're just doing our job." "And I know the law," Camille shot back, unwilling to be intimidated. "I haven't broken it." But reason had no place here. Without warning, the officer grabbed her arm. "You're resisting," he declared, though Camille had done nothing of the sort. "What are you doing?" she demanded, shock cutting through her voice. Nearby, a man pulled out his phone and recording. The officers ignored the murmurs of the gathering crowd. "Stop resisting," the first officer repeated, louder this time, performing for the audience. The cold bite of handcuffs snapped around Camille's wrists. Her heart pounded, but she kept her head high as they led her to the cruiser. Just before they shoved her inside, her gaze met that of a young woman filming the scene, their eyes locked in silent understanding. Tell the world what is happening here." As Camille sat in the back of the police car, something chilling happened. The officers laughed. "Thought you were smart, huh?" one of them sneered. The other officer glanced back at her through the cage. "Bet you think you're special, but out here, you're just another one of them." One of them. The words burned into her mind. She had fought cases like this. Now, she was living it. In the claustrophobic backseat, Camille's mind raced. She had built her career defending others against injustice. Now, she was living it firsthand. The booking process was dehumanizing. Fingerprints, photographs, a sterile holding cell buzzing under harsh fluorescent lights. "Enjoy your stay," one officer jeered as he locked the cell door. Camille sat on the cold bench, her hands trembling with anger. Hours passed before a young officer approached, his voice flat and emotionless. "Miss Johnson, you've been charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer." "On what grounds?" she demanded. "You can discuss that in court," he said before walking away. Released on bail later that night, Camille stepped into the cool air. Her best friend and colleague, Marissa, waited by the curb. "Camille!" She rushed over, her face tight with worry. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Camille said, though the word felt hollow. As they drove through the quiet streets, Camille's voice turned resolute. "I'm not letting this slide," she said. "Not this time." At her kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and law books, Camille began to outline a civil rights lawsuit against the officers and the department. She worked tirelessly, her hands shaking not with fear, but with unyielding determination. Weeks passed, and the community rallied around her. The video of her arrest spread like wildfire, sparking outrage and drawing national attention. Messages poured in from strangers who shared their own stories of injustice. Camille knew this fight was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced or humiliated by those in power. Her law firm hesitated at first, worried the public battle might tarnish their reputation. But Camille stood firm. "This isn't about me," she told them. "It's about what is right." One evening, as she sifted through case files, Marissa brought dinner. "You've been at this for hours," she said softly. "I don't have a choice," Camille answered. Marissa nodded, her expression serious. "People are watching you now. This is bigger than a lawsuit." "I know," Camille said quietly, "and I can't afford to lose." Then came the twist no one expected. Camille's attorney called with startling news. The very officers she was suing had a separate misconduct case, and fate had assigned Camille as the judge presiding over it. When the courtroom filled for the hearing, all eyes turned to the bench as Camille entered, her black robe flowing behind her. She moved with calm authority, but the tension in the room was palpable. At the defendant's table, Officers Carter and Daniels froze, their faces drained of color when they recognized her. The woman they had arrested in the park was now the one deciding their future. Camille allowed a pause, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then, in a clear, commanding voice, she said, "This court is now in session." Throughout the hearing, Camille maintained her professionalism. The evidence painted a damning picture, a pattern of excessive force and abuse of power. The officers shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny, their confidence crumbling as witness after witness described their misconduct. When Carter took the stand, his arrogance had vanished. "I thought the situation was escalating," he stammered. "I made a judgment call." "And do you believe tackling an unarmed, compliant individual was justified?" the prosecutor pressed. Carter hesitated, but the truth was already clear. By the end of the day, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Camille adjourned the hearing with the promise of a ruling the following week. As the officers shuffled out, their steps heavy with the weight of what was to come, Camille remained seated. Justice was not about vengeance. It was about accountability. And this time, there would be no escaping it. For Camille, the fight wasn't just personal anymore. Oh, it was about making sure no one else would have to endure what she had. And she was just getting started. If you believe in standing up against injustice, share this story. Let the world know that when we fight together, justice cannot be silenced. Injustice thrives in silence, but justice speaks loudest when we stand together. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Share it. Let the world see what happens when the tables turn, and those who abuse power are finally held accountable. Hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories that expose the truth and challenge injustice. Your voice matters. Your support makes a difference. Let's make sure justice is never silenced.